Hi, this is Sam and welcome to Logic. After talking about why I became an English teacher, how you can become an English teacher, what the teacher training entails, and after sharing my tips and personal take on how we can find the perfect teacher for us as language learners, all of which you can find over here if you're watching this on YouTube. Today it's time to talk about the polar opposite, i.e. why I personally stopped teaching students, meaning that as of a year and a half ago, I don't have any private clients. I don't teach anyone either in person or online, and all my teaching revolves around YouTube and all the other social media platforms out there. First, I'll tell you why I love teaching, then I'll break down the reasons why I decided to step away from having any kind of interaction with students. But careful, I have never stepped away from sharing knowledge. As a subscriber has recently said, once a teacher, always a teacher, and I could not agree more. I have always been a teacher at heart and will always be one. I remember that I used to tutor all my classmates, my brother, all his classmates, and not just in English. I used to tutor in German, maths, and Latin. I absolutely loved and still love the idea of teaching. I love helping people become independent and empowered through my knowledge, and I love watching them grow as individuals. Also, as a mathematician at heart, I find it absolutely fundamental for me as a teacher not just to impart knowledge, but I want to give my students the logical tools they can use in the future to tackle and understand a different and new part of the subject on their own without me. With a very basic mathematical example, as a teacher, I don't particularly care that my students learn by heart and then remember that 2 plus 3 equals 5. I want them to understand the logic behind it so they can apply it in the future. So when I give them 10 plus 4, they can get to the results on their own without me having to tell them or having to show them how to get there. With English, I really want people to understand why there is a big difference between I watched TV for 2 hours or I have watched TV for 2 hours, so they can understand it and then apply it in future cases where they need to use one of these two sentences. And I want them to understand the very big difference in meaning and what we understand if you just put an extra have in that sentence. And I understand that my method can be quite intense because I have such a strong desire to share all my knowledge that I always cover all the little exceptions, all the little bizarre cases that no one will ever even come across in real life. And I understand it can be a bit too much for some people, but I think it's up to you as a student to take on board as much as you want. You can take all of it, or you can just take the parts that you think are important to you, or the parts that you are comfortable with. Specifically as an English teacher, my teaching radar is always on, and as pathetic as this may sound, one of the German guys that I talked about in my Valentine's video, which you can find over here, his English is absolutely superb. His vocabulary is amazing, especially if you consider that he lives in Germany and doesn't really use English that much. And when I meet foreigners like that, my brain gets chemically excited and happy because I can see the progress that these people have made and how much work they've put into perfecting their language, and I am mesmerized by the level they've reached. So as an English teacher, I'm always on the mental lookout for people that excite me mentally like that. All of this is the reason why I have this channel in the first place. If there is any way I can first of all share my passion for English and then help you become as passionate about it as I am, and if I can give you any tips that can help you understand English better so you can command it and manipulate it however you want to and however you need in order to express yourself to your best. And if you're a teacher, and if I can give you any kind of new way of looking at English and teaching it to your students, that makes me happy and it satisfies my brain. So, if I love teaching so much, why on earth did I stop doing it? There are two primary elements that we need to bear in mind. The first one is that I haven't lost the passion for sharing knowledge. That's still with me, within me, and it will always be there. But I have lost interest in the interaction with students, and we'll expand on that later on. Then you may or may not know that I'm a full-time performer, and performing is my first and primary passion that comes before anything else. So between performing and teaching, I will always pick performing. And since I am a full-time performer, that's time consuming and it satisfies me enough to keep going. As much as I like teaching, dedicating too much of my life to it would not satisfy and please my soul on a very deep and primal level. Because of this, I've never worked for an institution such as a school because I need flexibility for my performances. Also, although I have my teaching qualification, so I am a qualified teacher of English as a foreign language, I don't have a degree, so no school would ever hire me because for some weird reason they just want to see a piece of paper that says that I have a degree. It can be a degree in anything. It could be in knitting. They just need to see the piece of paper, and that's just the way it works. Also, I would not want to be involved in the bureaucracy and paperwork related to working for an institution. I wouldn't want to be involved in anything that is not strictly and brutally teaching. I wouldn't want to deal with parents. I wouldn't want to have to follow a curriculum very strictly and religiously. I wouldn't want to deal with colleagues. So anything that is not brutal teaching would not interest me. Although I have taught children and teenagers in the past, but that was more as an unqualified tutor, I don't particularly like teaching children or teenagers, and the only professional experience I have with that was in the summer school here in London. And I have to be completely honest, I was blown away by how interested and how responsive these teenagers were. So it absolutely exceeded all my expectations. So I was very pleasantly surprised. However, I would not do that on a daily basis because it's just not for me. I'm now going to say something that will probably be regarded as an unpopular opinion and that will almost contradict what I said earlier about sharing my passion for English. Now, one of the main reasons why I only teach adults and I don't teach children specifically, maybe not teenagers in this case, is that I don't actually think it's my job as a teacher to make students, well, to help students like a subject, in this case, English. Basically, I don't think it's my job as a teacher to turn into a clown and play funny and silly games so that you can fall in love with a subject. But I think this stems from how I perceive learning as a learner myself. As a student, I don't want my teacher to necessarily be funny and make me like the language or the subject. I just want them to be knowledgeable. I want to know that I can trust what they say because they have a lot of knowledge to back that up. From a teacher, especially a language teacher, I want to know that I can trust their judgment in terms of grammar, and they know all the little grammar exceptions that I talk about in my videos. I want to know that they know all the crazy completely useless vocabulary that I sometimes teach you in English. I want to know that. I want to respect them as knowledgeable people. Then I will deal with liking the subject or not. So I think this way of learning as a student myself then reflects on how I perceive my role as a teacher. That being said, I consider myself lucky because based on what my students say, I do come across as naturally engaging in the way I teach English, and I convey my passion for it, which rubs off on my students, which is amazing. And I'm very grateful for it because I don't have to consciously tell myself, okay, be funny here, tell a joke there. Apparently it comes out naturally. And that's one of the reasons why I've started this more podcasty version of my channel. I've always noticed and I've always known that in my videos, especially my grammar videos, I am extremely serious and brutal, and my personality doesn't come across at all. I am not, well, at least I don't feel that I am as engaging as I know that I am in real life. Mainly that's for two reasons. First of all, I want to make sure that I deliver the goods as professionally as I can. And I also know that I teach English in a very mathematical and scientific way, so I have to concentrate on being very technically accurate. Also, believe it or not, the act of filming makes me extremely uncomfortable. I don't particularly like it, and we'll talk about that in another podcast episode. So I'm always on edge because of that, and I can feel that all of these elements don't allow my personality to come across. So in these podcasty episodes, I'm trying to be a little bit more natural without following a strict script, which I always have, because I want to make sure that I say exactly what needs to be said without any confusion. So why do I not want to interact with students anymore? Before we get right into that, I'll tell you what my teaching life looked like. I'm a performer, and like every performer, I had to work in hospitality, and long before COVID, I then started teaching groups in person of adults on a Monday and on a Wednesday initially, and then I moved to Saturdays, and I used to do 2 hours of grammar and 2 hours of pronunciation on a Saturday morning / afternoon. Then I started teaching online, first privately for platforms like italki and Verbling, and then I got hired as a freelancer by a company that hires teachers like me to teach, in my case, English to the employees of the companies that hired my company, basically. That was still on a freelance basis, so I could pick and choose when and if I wanted to teach, and since I wanted to run away from hospitality, I managed to turn that job into a full-time one. So I became a full-time online teacher, still with the flexibility that I needed as a performer. I ended my face-to-face lessons on a Saturday 6 months before COVID, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But during COVID, I was a full-time online teacher. Then I started my YouTube channel, and although I couldn't perform, since I'm a singing drag queen, I had to sing and practice, so I still had to practice at home, and it was a very intense time for me. Then when we came out of lockdown and I started performing again, I had to cut down on my teaching because I simply couldn't sustain it anymore. And since I was already feeling that teaching was starting to get to me, my plan was to quit teaching the moment I could make enough money to scrape by with my performing, which happened in May 2022. There are a couple of factors that led to my passion for interacting with students fizzling out. First of all, just like every other teacher in the world, ideally, I want to teach only students that want to learn. And since I love teaching very advanced students and very advanced English, it's always been my dream to literally go around the world and handpick and cherry pick the best students that I could find, so I could take their level to, ideally, perfection. Having students that have a deep and interested understanding and knowledge and command of English really excites my brain. And as I mentioned in my previous video, I don't particularly enjoy teaching beginners, but when I was working for the online company full-time, I couldn't pick the level of my students, so I did have to teach beginners. And do not get me wrong, if a beginner puts in the work and progresses, I find that also very satisfying. Of course, I would still pick an advanced student, but if I see results and I see interest, I do find that really pleasing as a teacher. What put me off my face-to-face groups was the fact that all my students were adults who consciously and actively decided to spend the money to ruin their Saturday mornings by coming to my classes. So they gave up a potential lie-in on a Saturday after a week of work to come and study. And my classes were extremely intense. Again, I used to do 2 hours of grammar and then 2 hours of pronunciation. These were two separate classes, and some students, luckily, and I'm eternally grateful, they liked them so much that they decided to stay for both. So they paid me money so they could be there on a Saturday morning for 4 hours. They were all advanced speakers because that's specifically what I requested in the brief of the lesson. Plus, they lived in London, so they were exposed to English a lot, even though that doesn't always mean that someone will speak English well, and we'll definitely talk about that in another episode. But anyway, they knew their way around English, and they could definitely hold their own in English. In the grammar lessons, we use the grammar games that I use in these videos as well. I created them myself for these face-to-face groups. But before that, we had a general chat about the week, so every single person could speak and I could write down mistakes that I heard, and we could discuss them together as a group. Now, the problem was that these adults who were paying me money so they could be there, they just wouldn't speak. They wouldn't say anything, and I had to pry and wring information out of them so that I could have something to listen to and to potentially correct. Now, that is not the attitude that I want as a teacher from my advanced adult students who pay me to, so they can be there. So I don't want to have to make the effort of getting you to speak. It's your job as an adult student who is paying to put in the effort. I don't want to have to force you to speak. I don't want to have to glean information out of you, because ultimately, if you don't speak, you are the person who will not improve, but I gain nothing from it. And I perfectly understand that talking to a teacher in front of other people can be daunting, but that's not something that I want to have to worry about with advanced students. Also, the setting was very informal and comfortable. We were not in a classroom. We were mainly in cafes at a round table, and it was only 8 of us maximum. So I did try to make my best to make everyone feel welcome. And I could tell that they did feel welcome, but they just didn't want to speak for one reason or another. And that made it very difficult for me mentally, because I always had to keep trying to get them to talk. Luckily, my classes were quite popular, I have to say, and that meant that people had to book them in advance before they sold out, because they were only for small groups. And that meant that I ended up having more or less the same people every week. So we built a sort of small community. Now, the problem with the pronunciation classes was that these people did not do any kind of homework during the week. Now, I never actively gave them any homework to do, but because in the classes we worked on the sounds that I talk about in my videos, and I gave them all the tips and tricks on how to do the A sound and how to do the O sound. Obviously, the idea was for them to then practice at home so they could then put into practice what they'd learned with me. Now, they never really did that, so what happened was every lesson, every Saturday, we still had the same problems. There hadn't been any progress during the week. And I completely understand that these people had real lives with real problems, with real jobs, and they did not have time or the intention to spend too much time on my lessons. That's absolutely fine. But as a teacher that puts a lot of hard work and passion and heart into teaching, it was very disheartening on an emotional level and very draining on a mental level. And that brings me to how my teaching method is perceived. I am perfectly aware that my method is not for everyone, because I really want to go into detail and I really want to analyze all the most absurd cases of grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary. And it's simply not what everyone is interested in. Even on my channel, when I do my grammar games, I understand that I bring examples that will probably never really happen in real life. I give you sentences that you will never come across in real life, but I like the mathematical logic behind them, so I do want to analyze them. And that's why I was a bit hesitant actually to start my channel, because I knew that the kind of English that I wanted to talk about was never going to be mainstream. So I would say that my channel is more aimed at language geeks like me, who like really to know about the philosophy and the logic of the language. But again, there aren't many of us out there, which is absolutely fine. We all have other interests, we all have other purposes and other reasons why we want to learn English in this case. Most of my students, both online and in person, simply wanted to be more exposed to English by a trustworthy guiding hand, which served the purpose of helping them with their confidence, which was their ultimate goal. They did not really care about speaking technically perfect English, and they did not really care about the deep mathematical logic behind why we say what we say, and that's perfectly fine. Basically, they wanted to know that what they already knew about English was good enough for them to hold a conversation, with a few extra elements added through the lessons. And that is absolutely fine. It is not a bad objective at all. I am not saying that the fact that you do not want to learn the deep philosophy behind the language means that you will never make it as an English speaker and you should be ashamed of yourself. That is not at all what I'm saying. We all have different reasons why we want to learn a language or why we need to learn a language. What I'm saying, though, is that that is not what I want to work on, and it is not what I want to provide to my students as a teacher. When I was a full-time online teacher, I was perfectly aware of the fact that I was dealing with people with real jobs and real problems. They had real families with children, and they were part of very intense and important companies and multinationals. So I knew that they had no time to do their English homework when they went home after the lesson. Some of them didn't even want to be there in the first place. Some of them were forced to do the course by their bosses because they wanted them to have a general smattering of English. And don't get me wrong, some of them were really good and it was very rewarding to teach them. But because of all of these things, it was mentally draining for me. Also because, again, you can't really see it in these videos, but I am very energized and when I do my lessons, so I put a lot of energy into being welcoming and into talking and chatting, because that's what I want people to see. I want them to see that English is used to talk and to chat, not just to pass an exam. So mentally, it was really demanding on my brain and on my soul, because I really had to give a lot, but I wasn't really getting much back from these people, because most of them, again, didn't really want to be there, or even if they did, they didn't really progress as much as they could have, because progressing was not really the objective that they had when they entered the course. Basically, I was tired of repeating the same things over and over again without seeing any improvement. And when I started noticing that this was getting a bit too much for me, I was actually very disappointed in myself, because I realized that I was working 40 hours like every other person, like every other teacher, and I couldn't quite understand why it was getting so difficult for me personally to cope with it. And then it hit me. Most teachers do work around 40 hours in an institution like a school, for example, but they don't spend all of these 40 hours with the students. They spend half of it with the students, and then the rest is preparation and marking and all of that. Now, as an online teacher, I did not have any of that. Luckily, the material was provided to us, and I have to say I never really followed it anyway, because I preferred having a more advanced and a more interactive lesson where we talked mainly and I corrected things, and then I did grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation based on that. And with this company that I was working for, it was the students that picked the teachers. So they came back to me because they liked this approach. But all of this is to say that luckily I did not have much preparation to do, or I didn't have any kind of marking to do, which was perfect, it was ideal, but I did spend 40 hours with my students. So my 9 to 5 was actually 9 to 5 with students, and that is a lot for any teacher. And that's when I realized that I was overextending myself and spreading myself too thin mentally, because no teacher that I know would work 40 hours with students. So this is the reason why I had to quit. I was burnt out completely. I had nothing left in me to give to students in terms of interaction. And that's why I love YouTube and social media. I can impart knowledge however I want. So especially in my videos, because I use a lot of maths and a lot of logic, I can structure my videos however I feel comfortable with, however I like, and it allows me to be very creative in the way that I want to be. And now it's up to you as viewers to either take it or leave it. In other words, YouTube allows me to be the teacher that I want to be, with all the excitement and satisfaction that come with it, without any hardship, which is why I am so happy that I made the decision to start this journey basically 3 years ago now, after years and years and years of thinking about it. And that's it for today. If you like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe to my channel down below. If you're a student of any subject, not just English, let me know what kind of teacher you like and what you think the role of a teacher should be. And if you're a teacher, let me know if you can relate to any of what I've said, or even if you disagree, so we can discuss it together. In the meantime, I will see you on Tuesday with another video.